us to move on to our next session, which is about strategic sovereignty in the new world economy.
Well, power today is something which is economic, technological, and strategic. Nations and corporations seem to be recalibrating alliances in a multipolar world where dependence can now become vulnerability. Now, control over supply chains, capital flows, and critical technologies defines competitive advantage, where governments are now rethinking the architecture of trust.
Absolutely, and hence companies are redesigning global footprints. But what does sovereignty mean in an interdependent world? That is the big question we are asking. In fact, alongside that, we're also asking, how do economies balance integration with independence? So this next session is going to explore all about that. It's going to explore the leadership choices that are required when global rules are being rewritten. In fact, for this very session, we'll have Dr. Vivek Lal, who's the Chief Executive Officer, General Atomics, Global Corporation; Kishore Murjani, who's the Chief Executive Officer, Alternatives Private Funds, Capita Land Investment; and Mary Ellen Iskandrian, she's the President and Chief Executive Officer, Women's World Banking. In fact, this session will also have Mike Chaitanya, who's the CEO at The Body Shop. Moderating this session will be Yezdi Nagpurwala, the Chief Executive Officer of KPMG here in India. And we'll have the guests and panelists here any moment, but this is going to be a well-rounded, it's going to be a very interesting session. You have all the bigwigs participating in this very session. This is going to be about ensuring strategic sovereignty.
Absolutely, and our guests are now make their way to the stage. Welcome to all of you. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. All the best, over to you.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, industry leaders, and my colleagues. It is an honor here to welcome each of you to our Global Business Summit. We are in our 10th year with the GBS. And the theme this year of a decade of disruption, a century of change, is also very, very appropriate and timely. Across economies, we are witnessing a profound transformation. Nations are rethinking supply chain, companies recalibrating risk, and societies redefining resilience. The global economy is more interconnected than ever, yet more fragmented than any point earlier in history. We today are privileged to have 4 exceptional global leaders with us, each representing a pillar of new world economy, technology and defense, financial inclusion, and global consumer brands. So let's begin our conversation on strategic sovereignty, the new world economy. Let me start with the first question, Dr. Lal. In a world where supply chains are global but security imperatives are national, how do you define strategic sovereignty today?
Thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. And that's an excellent question. I think strategic sovereignty, obviously touches on areas of national security, and within national security, you have energy security as well as defense security. I think it's important, of course, to build up domestically as well as trusted partnerships globally. And it's important, therefore, to become resilient in terms of any choke points that may exist in one's own evaluation. And eliminating those choke points by building up domestic capability as well as trusted partnerships is very critical. I think as the global community moves forward, it is important to see that various areas such as a common operating picture, persistent surveillance, manufacturing are all areas of increased development. And I do feel the underlying theme here is going to be human resource training and human resource knowledge and capabilities. So that's often underemphasized, but I do think at the root of all this is an intense focus on human resource development.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Lal. I'll come to you, Kishore. Capital flows are becoming politically sensitive. How is the idea of strategic sovereignty reshaping where and how global capital gets deployed?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Yazdi. Thank you for having me here. I think perhaps there's no better place to see that in action than in India. India, when it started opening up and liberalizing 30 plus years back, since then was hungry for capital, has attracted a lot of FII capital. And that FII capital is important, but it's fickle. It moves at the press of a button. Today, I think India, rather than chasing capital, you've got capital chasing India. So you have a lot of opportunities with FDI capital coming in, which is anchored. It builds the roads, it builds the data centers, it lays the fiber, builds the renewable plants. But I think when we talk about strategic sovereignty of capital, I think we should be clear that while capital that's coming should be somewhat secular in nature, I think there's nothing wrong in many ways to understand the intent of that capital. And that's how at least we interpret it. So I live in Singapore. I fly the Singapore flag proudly for CapitaLand, which is majority owned by Temasek. And if I use that as an example, Singapore as a country accounts for 0.5% of GDP globally, but in India it accounts for about 20% of FDI over the last 30 years. And it's done that not just in the financial markets, but by coming in and investing in assets long term. So Singtel invested in Bharti, been there since 2000, well before the digital age came up and networks were built in India. CapitaLand came here 30 years back. We built our first office park with Tata's. We're still here. Why is that important? Because we respect the sovereignty of where we are, and we bring our capital in a strategic format. I think that's how we think about that. And I think you have to align with the markets that you're going into. We take that extremely seriously. I think the question is an interesting one because it's many ways it's being charged in other ways, which perhaps we'll run short of time to talk about. But that's at least how we interpret being strategic capital. And I'd say in many ways we come again to India. We come to build India, not to trade India, right? So that's strategic how we think about it.
Thank you, Kishore. I love the phrase, build India, not trade in India. Let me come to Mary Ellen. When we speak of sovereignty, what role does financial institutional play in building national resilience?
Wonderful to be with all of you today. And I love the connection that this question is leading to, because financial inclusion is very simply defined as just having access to a bank account or a digital banking account in one's own name. But if we broaden that definition even just a bit to say having access to payments, savings, credit, insurance, pension, the full gamut of financial products, it becomes very clear that most of them have an important play an important part in an individual's and a household's and a community's resilience. I think a couple of places where we're starting to see this particularly is in the area of climate change, for example, and the resilience of a household or a community or frankly a region of a country to climate shocks. There's a very close correlation between financial exclusion and extreme climate vulnerability. We know that there are over 800 million people in the world who do not have the ability to access a digital payment in the time of emergency. So they may have a bank account, they may be included, In fact, the Global Findex, which is the most reliable gold standard database that the World Bank maintains on financial inclusion, noted that upwards of 70% of the emerging markets population was indeed included, but more than 50% of those people lost any access to financial resources because they weren't digitized in period of an emergency. A few weeks ago at Davos, I was on a fascinating panel hearing some of the largest companies in the world starting to say, we have to provide health insurance to our supply chain if we want that supply chain to still be there in a time of climate crisis, health crisis. So financial products and solutions are starting to become a major question in the resilience issues that the previous two speakers have raised.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria Ellen. Coming to Mike, brands today operate across borders, so does yours, across culture and across regulatory borders, regimes. And how do global companies maintain identity while navigating rising economic nationalism?
Thank you. Great question, and pleasure to be here today. I think for brands, purpose has to be at the core. And for a brand like The Body Shop, purpose has been at our core for the last 50 years. The brand has stood for and started the conversation on diversity, on plastics, on climate, on activism. And if you have that purpose, that can actually, and your core is clear in terms of purpose, you can actually then localize it to individual markets. And for example, in India, we have supported and we were at the forefront of starting Plastics for Change. 100 million plastic bottles have been taken off the streets of India due to an initiative that The Body Shop started. Today, Plastics for Change has become a platform for companies, global companies like L'Oreal and Estée Lauder. From the Plastics for Change process, we've also implemented and executed a global core value. So I think as long as your value is clear and your purpose is very clear, then you can actually cross borders. We're selling in 70 countries around the world, so we face this on a very regular basis of maintaining our global identity, yet being local to our consumers.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mike. I am conscious of time. We have exactly 4 minutes. So I'm going to request for a 1-minute answer from each of you. Dr. Lal, nations today are running to secure critical technologies. What is your view? Will alliances matter more or autonomy?
It's a great question, and I think it's obviously a combination of both. So if I could hit on very quickly, within a minute, 7 points that I think kind of dovetail into both of them. Once is, as I mentioned, persistent surveillance. It's going to be an important aspect. Robust data sharing between nations is going to be very important. The ability to deliver en masse is going to be critical as manufacturing aspects. Logistical dominance is absolutely critical to national security. As I mentioned, HR training. Then I do think electromagnetic spectrum dominance is going to be very important for resilience. And at the end of the day, a real-time operations picture, I think, is going to be a very important aspect.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Lal. Coming to Kishore, what role do alternative assets play in redefining economic power?
I think the alternative assets are often misunderstood what they are. They're an alternate to public markets where one can buy stocks and bonds, just to put it very simplistically. And I think what you've seen today, it's about a $15 trillion industry globally. what it's doing is it's giving both institutional and increasingly individual capital the ability to participate in private aspects of the economy. Vast majority of the companies in the world are public. The ability to own and support the build out of roads, of infrastructure, of power. Very often we can't do that very simply through the public market. So I think what alternatives as an asset class are doing is really democratizing that access, channeling it, and then helping fund and fuel both the ability for savers to earn better on their capital, and then for companies and assets to access those capitals in a way that maybe just buying a stock or bond may not be the easiest access point.
That's very well brought out. Thank you, Kishore. Mary Ellen, quick 1 minute response to, does digital finance accelerate empowerment?
Digital finance has enormous potential for accelerating empowerment, but only if we don't have the same garbage going in to credit scoring algorithms or any decision or assessment tool that a financial institution might be making in terms of a credit decision or an onboarding of a potential client. In India, for example, we're working with several digital lenders whose first attempt at a credit scoring algorithm only used data taken from men's cell phones. So women's behavioral, all of the great information that you can get from digital data was not even included in the original algorithm. So lots of potential, but it's got to be really good data.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Final question to Mike. Within the global economy, is consumer trust becoming a new form of soft power?
Absolutely. I think trust is an economic currency now, and trust goes with transparency as well. And from a consumer perspective, you know, the Body Shop has spent the last 50 years building trust with its consumers. And so we have to be very respectful of that trust, and we have to ensure that through transparency we deliver to that trust. Trust of sourcing, trust of ingredients that we use, trust in terms of sustainability and climate. All of these things are you know, fundamental to that trust being an economic currency. You earn it, and if you earn it, you have a reason to be present in those markets.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. With that, I'd like to conclude by thanking each of you. You've been a fabulous panel. I know the topic was broad enough to go on for a couple of hours, but we've run short of time. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that very, very interesting session. Lots of interesting insights on how brands can